Okay, all right. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon. As we kick off another webinar, the QFF Energy Savers webinar series. Today, we've got a guest host with David Hunt. We hope to provide an overview of the Energy Savers audit program, why an energy audit, and some numbers on industry representation. So feel free to pop in any questions as we go in the question bar, or chat amongst yourselves or with us at any stage during the webinar. So David will discuss today some findings from his energy audits conducted in the nursery industry. David currently works for the NGIQ Nursery and Garden Industry Queensland as a technical assistant maintaining the Pest ID website and as a case manager in our audit program. Prior to joining NGIQ, he worked for Queensland DPI as a scientist and as an independent consultant, conducting research projects on water and energy use. He has also developed a self-assessment tool for the protected cropping industry on how to become more energy efficient. He has extensive knowledge of production systems used in intensive horticulture. So welcome, David.
Okay.
Yeah. Myself, I'm part of the QFF Energy Savers team, the extension program, and we've been doing quite a few audits on farms lately, so we hope to get the message across in some of our webinars. Okay, so the energy audit program. This is part of a Queensland government program. They've donated some money towards the program. The Queensland Farmers Federation team, being the main contact, are delivering the project in conjunction with industry bodies. This is where David comes along online with us. As part of NGIQ, he's helping to deliver part of this program. To date, we've covered industries such as cane growing, cotton, dairy, horticulture, and intensive animals such as poultry and beef. Why an energy audit? There's three types of energy audits that we're undertaking on sites that follow the Australian Standard 3598. It follows a systematic process that delivers quality results, and it identifies areas in your business to reduce energy consumption, costs, and other measures such as carbon, productivity, water use. It's more of an underlying component of the energy audit process. As you can see, we've covered quite a few number of industries from this slide, across all different industry types. Chicken growers, horticulture, pork, beef cattle, nursery being one of our main contributors with quite a few audits undertaken. I believe there's 23 audits at the moment. So David has some good results that he will talk about during the webinar from the nursery industry, in particular heating, sugarcane, grain, dairy, etc. To date, we've gathered all the data that's been provided to us from the energy auditors. Across 164 farms, we've saved, quite a lot of energy. 7,300,000 kilowatt hours saved that we've identified in the program. This amounts to large costs on farm, 2,600,000 in costs. It's the money stacks up, and part of the energy audit program is to try and reduce the costs for some of these farmers and provide other benefits as well. So across the industries, we highlight different technology types that we find in the audit program. We find a lot of different technologies such as solar, batteries, irrigation pumping, But today's webinar, we're more focused on the heating side of things. Heating and cooling contribute large costs to the majority of farming industries. So David's going to discuss heating a little bit further in his presentation, and it should prove quite interesting. He's got some good results there, not only for the technology, but also across other types of findings that he's found in that area of his industry. So across heating and cooling, we've found quite large kilowatt hour savings, as you can see from this slide here. There's 2,500,000 roughly in cooling, with heating closely behind at around about 1,750,000. So as you can see, the heating does contribute quite large costs and towards energy consumption on site. So without further ado, I might pass over to David, and David can run through his findings in the energy audit program. So over to you, David, if you want to start sharing your screen.
Sharing it is.
Perfect.
So it sounds like I'm getting a little bit of feedback here, so I'll just end up turning down the if I do anything else. So as said, we're here a little bit to do with heat, the results we found in the nursery industry, and have a little bit later on the heating systems that are used in the industry. So we will get started. So let's start with total of 26 nurseries from the nurseries industry is participating in this project, and there's a large range of them, from small mum and dad retail nurseries that provide plants to the local communities, right through to large commercial producers that supply fruit and vegetable trees and seedlings to farmers. Nursery sizes ranged from half a hectare through to 12.5 hectares. Not necessarily the largest or the smallest, but it covers a broad range. The crops grown range from ornamentals, such as your little potted colours and your flowers that you get at Bunnings, through to vegetable seedlings for retail and farmers, nursery trees, again, for retail and farmers, landscape plants. Some of these are large, mature landscape trees valued at $20,000 each, and also nursery or native plants used for revegetation projects, supplying councils. The nursery industry in Queensland, according to QDAF, has a total value of $921 million per year. These 26 nurseries provide probably about $37 to $40 million per year. And some of these will fluctuate depending on whether they're in a drought scenario or not. So just to put that into perspective, this graph is the size, or the physical size, of nurseries versus the number of plants produced. As you can see there are 3 nurseries that produce a significant amount of plants. Now these are basically seedling producers. So number 6 and number 21 are vegetable seedling producers, and they predominantly supply farmers in the farming communities. And number 20 is mainly a forestry seedling producer, while the others are more across the board. Number 11 there, the one with the largest area, doesn't produce a large amount of plants because they're a landscape producer. So they have hundreds of plants across a large area, but they don't produce that many of them per year as the seedling producers would. So just because a nursery is large doesn't mean they produce large quantities of plants. And as I've said, those 3 small nurseries produce a large number of vegetable seedlings. So the overall results for the project to date is of the 26 nurseries, about 1.87 megawatt hours of electricity is used, costing around the $455,000 mark. Now, if we compare that to your average Queensland home of 2 adults, 2 children, which uses around about 10 to 15,000 kilowatt hours per year, these 26 nurseries are using roughly equal to 150 homes. The audit identified potential energy savings of around about 879,000 kilowatt hours per year, costing $262,000. And that effectively is a reduction of around about 50%, or roughly equivalent to about 70 homes in energy savings. The average payback period across the nurseries was around about 5 years. Some of these, though, had their upgrades repaid within the first 6 months. Some of them, one of them we did the numbers on, and it turned out that it'd take 15 to 17 years to pay back on some of the upgrades. But of course, it all comes down to whether or not it's worth it. And if it is a generational nursery, then 17 years is not too bad, because you'll end up getting your money back. Some of these savings were from simple tariff assessments, identifying alternative tariffs that best suited the way the nursery uses their energy use. Most savings is from upgrading old equipment and changing management practices. What I'm going to show you here, this is a graph that compares energy use and energy costs before any upgrades are done. So this is where we started, and the columns with stars indicate nurseries that already had an existing solar PV system installed. And for the smaller nurseries, that solar PV system offset anywhere from 30 to 50% of their energy use, but they were still looking at how they can reduce their costs. I basically put this graph up to show that energy use and energy costs is not necessarily a simple one-to-one relationship. You can see that with most of these nurseries, there is a pattern forming, but as we can see with number 20 there, it's quite a significant energy user. In fact, it's the third highest user of all of the nurseries, but it has a relatively low energy cost. There's a couple of reasons for this. It's related to different production methods for different crops. It's also related to different levels of technology. But with some of these nurseries, they span over 2 or 3 properties, which means they have 2 or 3 NMIs, or metering points. And in the case of nursery 20 there, it actually spans 2 properties. So they've been quite smart in the sense that they've designed their nursery layout so they draw energy equally from the 2 metering points, which means that neither metering point or neither account actually go over that 100,000 kilowatt hour threshold, and they don't get charged any demand charges. If that was a single metering point on their current energy use, they would have been hit with significant energy demand charges, and their energy bill could have been 2 or 3 times higher. So that's one of the ways that you can reduce energy use if you have that situation. But the main reason why some of these nurseries have got lower energy costs is because they've actually contacted their energy supplier and negotiated the best price for them in the way that they use their energy. Unfortunately, in regional areas, though, there could be less of a choice with some of these nurseries, but it's still worthwhile talking to your energy supplier, as the Queensland Government is making new tariffs available specifically for irrigators, and it's certainly worthwhile having a look at that and seeing whether or not you can reduce your energy use by changing tariffs. Looking at equipment time of use and choosing the right tariff to suit the way it's used can actually provide a lower energy cost. So this next graph is the same information as the previous one, but I've sorted it by nursery size, and I have to admit I've just noticed that there is a discrepancy there, where I thought number 11 was the largest nursery, but it says number 18 is. I've done this to show that the energy use is not related to the physical size of the nursery. So if we look at nursery number 13 there, which is the second smallest nursery, it actually has the highest turnover, the highest dollars per hectare of all the nurseries, and yet it has a relatively low energy use compared to some of the others. Now I'm going to put an overlay up. I have to stress that this overlay is not to scale. It has been exaggerated, and I've exaggerated it purely just to emphasize the point that just because a business is small or only uses a small amount of energy doesn't mean that there aren't any savings to be gained. So if we have a look at this graph, we can see that some of these nurseries have significant potential to reduce their energy costs, while others, and mainly the big players, if they're a large nursery with a lot of technology, it's pretty much inherent that the technology is efficient anyway, so they may not have as much option to reduce their energy use. But this is showing that it's a good idea to have an energy audit done, because the actual process of having the audit done will identify where the opportunities are to reduce energy use, but it also identifies opportunities to streamline production systems and also gives you an indication of how much energy you can actually save. Now I'm going to move on to the categories that we've identified the recommendations in. With this graph, it shows the number of nurseries per category, but it also shows the number of upgrades per nursery. So in the case of, if we look at solar PV there, it's saying to us that there's 20 nurseries that were recommended to install solar PV, but there was actually 27 solar systems or solar PV systems that were recommended. And why that is because some of these nurseries actually have multiple metering points, like I said, and we actually recommended that if they had a separate metering point for their pump, and perhaps putting in a small solar system to run their pump during daylight hours if it's just a transfer pump, as well as putting on a larger system on top of their, say, packing shed or something like that, to actually offset their actual nursery energy use. The main recommendation was solar PV, followed by pump systems. And as most irrigators know, pumping systems can be extremely expensive to run. And if you had sat in on our energy efficiency pumping webinar we did a couple of weeks ago, it would have shown you or given you a few ideas on how you can reduce your pumping costs. I'm not going to go into pumping too much. I think pumping everyone is aware of. As it shows there, the next highest or third highest energy use was heating systems. And I'm not going to go into heating systems too much right now, because I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on. But the most surprising of all was that there's still a large number of businesses out there still using fluorescent and incandescent bulbs. And this is one of the cheapest and quickest ways to reduce your energy use. For example, one of the nurseries I audited had 72 fluoro lights throughout the nursery. And they used them anywhere from 1 hour a day to 24 hours a day. The simple thing was, if they replaced all 72 fluoro lights, it would cost $977 to buy the LED alternative. And these LED tubes are basically a direct replacement. You don't need an electrician for them. You just pull out one little tube and put in the LED tube. And by doing that for this nursery, outlaying $977 actually saved them $2,280 in energy costs per year. So considering the relatively low capital cost, upgrading the lights is pretty much a no-brainer. It's a simple, quick, easily done. And even if you do need to have an electrician involved, because there are some light fixtures that will need an electrician to just do a little bit of an alteration to the wiring. But still, even if you paid an electrician $500 for a couple of hours to do it, then you're still looking at, well, these guys are still looking at over $2,000 in savings per year. So it certainly is justifiable for the outlay. Another simple savings area or category is management measures, as I call them. These are things such as turning off lights when they're not in use, activating energy saving modes on equipment, increasing temperature set points on air conditioners. So a 2-degree increase in your set temperature. So if you're running your air conditioning at 20 degrees, if you increased it to 22 degrees, then that 2-degree increase in air conditioning in temperature, you may not notice, but it could actually reduce your energy costs for your air conditioner by 10%. Another management measure was doing simple maintenance. I know everyone talks about doing maintenance, but it is a significant option. Following manufacturers' recommendations, lubricating bearings, servicing equipment, just simple maintenance can actually reduce that equipment's energy use by 10%. So it's not just the service guy saying pay us, it actually can save you money in the long run. If we were to look at just the management measures alone and a combined, we identified a combined savings of $6,870 in energy costs that could be achieved with a capital cost outlay of $5,800. So again, you're going to save $6,800 if you outlay $5,800. So again, it basically is a no-brainer. Outlay a small amount of capital for a large ongoing benefit. And this is the thing, is that is an ongoing benefit year on year. But I have to stress that not all recommendations provided an impressive return. As I said before, there was one that we calculated it would take 17 years for it to pay back. Pardon me. But if there's multiple recommendations across the business, they all might be small, but when they're all added up and considered together, it can actually add up to be a relatively significant savings, both in energy and costs. Also too, it will reduce your carbon emissions. So certainly having an audit done, talking to somebody who knows how to assess these systems, excuse me, can certainly benefit your business. So if we now look at capital costs, so the cost of implementing these recommendations and the electricity cost savings achievable. So on this graph, the cost to implement is the green columns and the cost savings are the orange bars. And for most of these businesses, there's 15 of the 26. The cost savings far outweighed the actual cost to implement. And in those situations, if you have to outlay $5,000 to $20,000 to save $10,000 to $20,000 per year, then it's certainly worth the money because those savings are year on year. Also, if you have an audit done and it shows there's these sorts of savings, so you've got an audit, it's been conducted as per the Australian standards, so it will be recognised officially. If you have one of these audits and you took it to your bank manager and said, oh, here's my audit, they recommend that I upgrade my system, it's going to cost me $40,000 to do it, 9 times out of 10, the bank manager will use that as a justification for the loan. I've had one guy who bought a business in North New South Wales, talked to me about it and said, how can we reduce our costs? We had a irrigation specialist come in and he looked at the system. This was a hydroponic lettuce grower. He had 17 pumps throughout the nursery. The irrigation specialists recommended that he replaced quite a number of them at a cost of $38,000. And he took that to the bank and the bank just simply went, no brainer, bang, approved, thank you very much. That $40,000 pardon me, that $40,000 or $38,000 was paid off in the first 6 months, purely because the energy savings, but it wasn't just the energy savings, it was also the reduced stress on the system, less damages, less breakages, less blowouts. So there are all these other hidden benefits as well. There are some circumstances though where there is a large cost to upgrade and only a small cost savings. But like I said, once these things are done and once these systems are upgraded, those savings are what you'll be saving year on year. So in the case, if we look at nursery number 4 there, it has quite a large cost to implement with only a small cost savings. But that's okay, because those cost savings will happen year on year. Pardon me. However, there is a point where energy savings will be minimal and the cost to implement high. But if you get to this point, then you probably achieved the best efficiency you can anyway. If you look at number 14 there, the cost savings equals the cost to implement, and it's quite a significant outlay. But you then have to look at that and ask yourself, well, yes, it's quite a significant amount of money, but what are the ongoing benefits? So that's just something to think about if you start talking to somebody about having equipment upgrades. Don't just look at the cost of the upgrade, look at what those benefits are going to give you over time. So here we are back again at this first graph I showed you of energy use versus energy costs. This is the before scenario. Now, if we compare that with the potential savings after the upgrades have been done, there is a marked reduction in energy costs for most nurseries. Some of these nurseries look like they have no energy use or costs, but that's not right. They will actually still be paying their service charges and connection fees. But these costs are insignificant compared to the amount of energies that the costs that they've saved. And for example, if we look at nursery number 13 again, it looks like they have no energy costs there at all. Now for this nursery, they outlaid $42,000 to upgrade their irrigation pumps and install a solar PV system. But they did that because they also wanted to expand the business, and they're looking at, over the next 3 years, expanding the nursery by 60%. So it was a significant increase in not only energy use, but energy costs. And we looked at how we could improve their system without incurring more costs. And it worked out that by outlaying this money, they've actually now effectively given themselves a zero energy use, but it's also set them up for the next 3 years. So even though they're going to increase their energy use, their energy costs are not going to increase. So the $42,000 outlay was considered to be a very, very viable expense. So the take-home message here out of all of this is, no matter how big your business is or how much energy you use, there's always options to reduce energy costs. It's a matter of assessing where that energy is being used, how it's being used, and why it's being used, and then looking at the options of how you can streamline that, reduce those costs. And yes, you may have to outlay some money to do that, but like I keep saying, the savings you would obtain are year on year. So now that's pretty much the overview of all of the nurseries for this project, but I also wanted to now touch on heating systems, because doing these audits and the Energy Savers project, it really has highlighted how many nurseries out there are still using old technology in their propagation houses. Now, these heating systems, whether they're used in a nursery or a dairy or a cucumber grow or whatever, the principles are the same. Even though this is for nursery industry, the principles of energy efficiency are the same. It's just a matter of how they relate to that industry. So many of these heating systems were designed when electricity was relatively cheap. But now growers have to make a conscious decision to turn on heating systems as the cost of heating has increased considerably, and can be the next highest cost after pumping, which previous graph shows. Even though these heating systems are only used for a few months of the year, many growers have to make a serious decision as to whether using a heating system will result in a large enough increase in production to justify the running costs. So why do they actually use heating systems? Plants can survive in a wide range of temperatures, but each plant species will have a preferred temperature range, and this will change depending on the actual life stage of the plant. When germinating seeds and propagating cuttings, providing the optimal temperature will increase the germination and survival rate of young plants. Now, that's not the only reason. As the first one there says, it allows crops to be grown out of season. So, especially for these seedling producers, vegetable seedling producers that supply farmers, they actually have to germinate and grow these seedlings out of season in winter months to have the seedlings ready to go into the ground come spring, so the produce can get to market. So you can't grow seedlings in the middle of winter unless you have some form of heating system. Also, the heating system will actually shorten the germination times and allow for more production cycles per year. So with one nursery I've spoken to, he's managing to reduce his seed production or propagation down to 6 weeks, which means that he can actually get in an extra production cycle in a 12-month period, and we've worked out that that's worth an extra $16,000 to him. So that's one of the reasons why they use these systems. The target temperature range is usually between 16 to 26 degrees. Some growers like to have them set at 18 degrees, others like to use much higher temperatures. It does depend on the plant species, but it also depends on the grower themselves, what they've found works best for them. You can actually reduce temperatures depending on how you heat your system, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Pardon me. But in most cases, in most nurseries, they will use some form of heating for about 3 months of the year, and this can increase productivity by 20 to 40%. And as I said, reduce their production cycles down by several weeks. However, it is expensive to heat a greenhouse during winter, especially if the heating system is old and inefficient, or the greenhouse doesn't have any heat retention technologies. It then comes down to a balancing act between energy inputs and the demand for seedlings at different times of year, and what the sales price of those seedlings is, as to whether or not they turn on the heating system. So the types of heating systems used, they range from heat lamps, or in a lot of places that use grow lights, especially the high pressure sodium grow lights that output a large amount of heat. They kind of double as both a grow light and a heating source. But there's the good old electric element in galvanized piping, top right-hand corner picture there. Hot air heaters, and they come in a range of different sort of blowers with heating elements and gas fires and all sorts of different things. There's hot wire in foil. They tend to sit underneath propagation trays. Hot wire in sand. So, and also you've got the hydronic heating or hot water pipes in sand. And the bottom picture there with the red pipes shows how those benches are built, with the hot water pipes running through, and then they lay the sand over the top of that, and the sand then becomes a thermal mass. So they heat up the sand, and then that dissipates the heat to the trays. But that is relatively old technology nowadays. They all have their benefits, and they can be reasonably effective if used in the right situation and are maintained properly. But if they are used in the wrong type of greenhouse or are old, they can be using considerable amounts of energy and be costing much more than modern alternatives. And like I said, some of these heating systems, when they're turned on, only for 3 months a year, will use a significant amount of energy and costs. So let's have a quick look at the cost of heating for some of these systems. So as we can see there, all three of these examples are actual heating systems assessed during the audit process. The first one was the most surprising of all. It is a hot water or hydronic heating system, and I didn't realise how many of these were still being used in the industry. These were actually designed by a CQEB engineer. Now, for those who don't know, CQEB is the precursor to Energex back in the 1980s. And a lot of these systems were designed by a CQEB engineer back in the 1980s when electricity was cheap. They basically use a heating element mounted inside the 2-inch galvanized pipe, steel pipe, with a small water circulation pump. Basically, they work like a domestic kettle and a heating element in water, basically. They're usually around about 10 to 12 kilowatts, which may not sound like a lot, but when running one of these systems for 16 hours overnight, like I said, for 3 months, can be equivalent to the average household's energy bill. And for some of the small to medium nurseries, this could be half of their yearly electricity bill, which is why a lot of the systems just sit in the corner of the shed and only turned on when they're absolutely necessary. With hot air heaters, again, like I said, there's a wide variety of hot air heaters out there, but they are only as good as the structure that they're used in. And again, I'll talk about this a little bit later in the next couple of slides. But you can see there the hot wire foil, which is really only designed for small propagation benches. If we were to compare the hot wiring foil, or we were to heat a medium-sized greenhouse, as in the first example, with the hot wiring foil, then the heating costs for using that system is going to be more along the lines of $8,200 per year instead of the $1,633. So this is why heating systems are important to look at and to assess and to determine whether they're being used in the right situation. To take that a bit further, the other problem associated with heating costs is that, like I said, a lot of these heating systems will sit in the corner of a shed, and they're normally in a different area to the actual propagation tunnel or greenhouse. And the distribution pipes run across the ground. So when these systems are turned on and the galvanized pipe heats up, it's got to heat up all of the water in the entire system before that actually becomes usable. But as it starts to heat up, it's dissipating heat to the atmosphere at a rate of around about 100 watts of energy per meter per hour. In most cases, the heating head is located, like I said, in another building, and the pipes lay on a cold, wet ground. And although poly and PVC pipes don't lose as much heat as galvanized pipes, laying exposed hot water pipes on a cold, wet ground will also draw heat from the pipes before the hot water even gets to the propagation benches. So if you add the heat losses from the distribution pipes to the heating head, the heat loss can be significant and actually waste a lot of energy and money. And as I've got there, one example of one nursery I assessed, or we assessed, the heat loss from the pipe was calculated at 32 kilowatt hours per day. They only heated for 123 days of the year. But it calculated out that over that 123-day period, they were losing almost $1,000 of heat energy that was being dissipated from the pipes and the heating head. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well later on. But now we get to the condition of the greenhouse and how it affects heating systems. This is one of those situations where a lot of people don't even consider it. But with heating greenhouses, it depends on the type of greenhouse or tunnel, the type of cladding that's used, and the condition of that cladding. Damaged or poorly maintained greenhouses will actually influence heating costs. Torn coverings, gaps around doors, and no heat retention technology, as in thermal screens, all lead to an increase in air exchanges at the wrong time of year, when you're trying to maintain a high temperature overnight in the middle of winter. And to put a cost or a dollar or numbers on that, the 3 millimeter gap around a door or a tear in the side of a greenhouse can allow 14 cubic meters of warm air to escape that greenhouse. And what that does is it causes not only hot and cold spots within the greenhouse, which then affects the actual survival rate and growth rate of the seedlings, but it also requires, and in this case, it was calculated out as about 7.3 kilowatt hours of electrical energy extra to compensate for that air exchange. So again, looking at the type of cladding, looking at whether it's a sealed greenhouse, whether you have full climate control over that greenhouse. And this also is relevant for ventilation as well. In a lot of these sort of situations where people will put in circulation fans or extraction fans, these fans are actually located in an area or orientated to suit the greenhouse to circulate the air in a set pattern. When you actually have a gap or air leakage, it basically short circuits that ventilation. So if you've got, in the case of that photo there where they've got a circulation fan that's pushing air along the greenhouse, and it might have another one at the other end pushing it back up the other side. But if there's a gap or if there's a tear in the side, effectively that creates a short circuit. So it brings in excess air, cools it down, and you lose that control over the growing environment. So not only will these sort of issues affect your energy use, it will also affect the evenness or uniformity of your crop that you're growing, and can also cause disease issues as well, and also allow pests to enter the greenhouse if you're using a greenhouse. So that's a little bit more in protected cropping. So what are some of the solutions to reduce heating costs? There's a variety of simple low-cost solutions. One of them is to just simply insulate the heating head and the pipes. So as you can see there in those photos, this is actually from one of our nurseries, and it's a slightly different configuration to the other one I showed you earlier. But again, it's heating elements, 3 heating elements mounted inside a galvanized pipe that heats up the water, and the pump just circulates it around the greenhouse. I said to the nursery manager that while I was out there, I said, look, simply just insulating that heating head is going to save you some money. And he went out the next day, bought some, now this is ordinary everyday insulation wrap that they use in housing. So it's not even the extra thick foam insulation that I would have recommended, but he went out, he wrapped his heating head up with this insulation, and his comment to me was he did not believe how much of a difference it made. He said it was a noticeable reduction in energy costs. He's actually had it set on timers, so it would come on certain times of the day, and then the heating elements would kick in and turn on and turn off depending on water temperature. And he said he noticed that the heating system wasn't on as often. So that just a simple little fix. I think it cost him maybe $50 or $60 to buy the wrap. There's also the high cost solutions. such as installing an insulated water tank. One of the simplest things here is that you could put in a domestic hot water system. It has insulation already there. It has its own heating element. It also operates at a much lower temperature, a much lower electricity use than some of these older heating systems. So just simply putting in a insulated hot water tank and putting in a temperature sustaining valve will actually reduce the energy costs, because then you could have your energy, have the hot water heated prior to the night. So you've already got your hot water. You don't have to turn on the heating system to heat it before it becomes effective. You can also install solar heating. So you can either install solar PV systems that provide the electricity to an electric hot water system, and therefore it heats that water during the day, and then the existing heating head only operates as necessary overnight, which would be rare. Or you can use the evacuated tubes to heat the water via solar, which is then stored and used overnight. And as long as you've scaled the system right and have a large enough tank, all of the heating can be done during the day using solar, and your heating element may not have to turn on at all overnight, because if the tank is large enough, it will provide all the heating required. As to the actual structure itself, repairing the structure, closing the gaps, fixing tears, making sure everything seals properly, installing thermal screens. And there's thermal screens and there's shade screens. So the thermal screens act at night at a certain time, and you put these on an automated timer or temperature sensor. They will close at a set time, and they help to reflect the heat back down onto the plants. So you're not heating up the atmosphere. You're not just trying to heat the world. So upgrading these technologies may increase your energy use, but it can also increase the germination rate and the survival rate of the plants. So that leads to an increase in productivity and also a reduction in plant deaths. So there's multiple benefits from doing this. It's not just reducing your costs. Other techniques in reducing heat system energy use or costs. You can look at tariffs. They do help, but there is limited benefit from those, because most times when you want to use the heating system, it spreads across both peak and off-peak times. So at some stage, you're still going to be paying a higher cost at peak rates if you start your heating system at 4 p.m. So most heating systems will be from 4 p.m. to 7 a.m. Over the coldest part of the day. So it is difficult to find the right tariff, and using control load tariffs like T33 aren't really that good. A lot of these growers will steer away from that purely because even a short amount of time of having their heating system turned off overnight can have a major impact on the plant growth and survival. And of course, that all means a reduction in productivity and income. Other ways is checking the heating system is working correctly and maintaining the system, including calibrating the sensors and also the control mechanisms. You know, take out the sensor or have a look at the sensors. If the sensors are actually rusted or they're covered in a film or dirt or whatever, it actually affects how efficient or how effective they are or how accurate they are. And your control mechanism is only as good as what the sensor is. So by cleaning and calibrating that sensor or replacing old sensors like that one you see there, which is all rusted, that sensor has probably got anything from a 5 to a 10% error. So it's not telling the control mechanism the right information. So the control mechanism will be then running your heating system at a higher temperature to compensate, because it thinks the temperature is different to what it really is. So calibrating, cleaning, checking all of the control mechanisms will actually help to reduce energy use. Install monitoring systems such as sub-meters or real-time monitors. It'll help you to identify and evaluate what that system is using. And it can help also when you're actually talking to a specialist on how you can change things. If you go to somebody and say, look, this is really costing me a lot of money, I need to fix it. And they go, well, how much is it costing you? If you've got a sub-meter or a real-time monitor on there, you can show them the data and they'll go, oh, okay, I can see the spikes, I see the hours of usage, and they can use that information to devise an appropriate system for your greenhouse. The other thing too is move heating systems from above the crop to below the crop. This is becoming more standard practice nowadays, but in the past, they used to try and heat the entire greenhouse, and so they put the heaters up in the roof, or they'd have air blowers in the aisles. And all that's doing is trying to heat the space above the plants. So now a lot of greenhouses are moving to root zone heating, where the heating is actually under the bench or under the trays. And that comes back to that original concept of hot wire or hot water in sand. So this root zone heating actually is more beneficial. It reduces the energy use. You can actually run the temperature of the greenhouse at a few degrees lower than the root zone, and the plants won't suffer because it's the roots that maintain the plant. If it's like having cold feet. If you've got cold feet, the rest of you feel cold. If you keep your feet warm, then you're warm. So it's the same principle. And again, making sure that your structure is in good condition and all systems are working at their optimum. It's a no-brainer really. It's just simply following the process. So this is a little break or summary of the benefits of upgrading a heating system, and these are all real examples from this Energy Savers program. And they range from simple upgrading the thermostat control and calibrating sensors, like I said, will save you money. Insulating heating head pipes and distribution pipes, so that's just simply doing that insulation wrap. By doing that, outlay of $614, and it'll save you $480 with a payback of 1.3 years. So that's 70% return on investment. Any economist would love that. Add the traditional hot water system and insulate the pipes. Again, it's a little bit more expensive, but it'll save you over $1,800 a year. And again, it gives you that return on investment of around about 73%. Now, if you wanted to go and replace the entire system with a solar hot water system, insulated watering tanks, and instead of using old style piping or something, you use what they're now providing is these small capillary mattings, capillary mats. Some people say I shouldn't call them capillary mats because that then confuses people with capillary irrigation. But basically what it is a whole range of small little tubes in a mat that you lay down on your bench, and then you put your propagation trays over the top of that, and it then provides a nice even heat to the root zone of the plants. Now, to install one of those, we had a quote of around about $9,500, but it would save over $2,000 a year. But when we talk about heating, we're really only talking about 3 months. And in some of these nurseries, they've all said that if they had a more efficient heating system that didn't cost them the earth, then they would probably run their heating systems a little bit longer. So we haven't even looked at what benefits to production doing this sort of work is or will provide. Another option is to replace the system with a heat pump. Now, these heat pumps are much more expensive. They will provide you a much greater return on investment in some cases, but you have to be very careful with heat pumps. You don't necessarily want to try and use a heat pump in an area that has temperatures less than 0 degrees overnight. Although the heat pump, again, as long as you have the right sized insulated tank, the heat pump will heat that water during the day and you won't have to use heating overnight. But if it's not scaled properly and that heat pump tries to provide the heat overnight when it's 0 degrees or -4 degrees, it's not going to be as effective. It's only going to ramp up the energy use. And again, the last example there of upgrading the greenhouse to retain more heat. And in this case, $59,000 seems like a lot of money, but this was a retrofit of an existing greenhouse. They put in new cladding that had a higher R rating. So in other words, it retained more heat. They put in knee walls, which actually helped to keep the cold air out. They put in thermal screens and a basic climate control system that actually managed the entire system, including the heating. So the climate control system would sit there and monitor the temperature and humidity in the house. It would then adjust the thermal screens or the shade screens or turn on the heating system as it's required. And yes, it's a major cost, but it was estimated to reduce heating costs by 40%. And it also allowed the nursery manager to have a tighter control over the growing environment, which meant that he could actually manipulate the growing environment depending on the species of plant he was growing. But also it provided a method of monitoring not only the energy use, but the actual growing condition in the house, because with that small climate control system, it actually had a little software app that would feed back to his phone. So if anything went wrong, it would actually put an alert up on his phone so he could go down and have a look at what it was, which meant that he was there quicker to catch any problems, so it didn't actually affect his crop. So out of all of this, I say if heating or if any production system across any business is concerned about their energy use, it is certainly well worth having an energy audit done to identify what production systems or equipment could be upgraded. Or you can also talk to your local specialists and have a power meter installed as the first step. Talk to your energy supplier about what tariff you're on, and does the tariff you're on actually equal or meet your energy use requirements. Have an energy monitoring system installed so you can actually identify where and when that equipment or that energy is being used. A more efficient heating system, or any of the production systems, the more efficient they are, the lower the operating cost to run them. And in the case of seedling germination, it's been known and proven that the seedling survival rate and the plant health is improved with a more consistent heating system. So simple low-cost solutions are a good place to start in the case of the little cheap wrap of the heating system, as opposed to installing a whole new greenhouse. Certainly worthwhile having an energy audit done, and you can save money no matter where or what. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation. But I just wanted to point out there are some resources and further information if anybody's interested. The NGIQ website and also the Nursery Production FMS website both have technical libraries that have articles and other resources on efficiencies for not just energy efficiency, but efficiency in production systems. Also too, the Australian government has got a new program, the Energy Efficiency Communities program. Pardon me, from what I've been told, it's going to be opened up to various business groups and industries. At the moment, it is open to dairy industries, but keep an eye on that website. We will let you know through our industry associations when opportunities arise for you to actually apply and have a look at that, but certainly have a look at it. They're offering grants to help in reducing energy costs and emissions. Of course, there's always the Energy Matters website, where there's a wealth of information and resources there to just help you determine how your energy use is. But the last one, energy efficiency in your greenhouse, that's a website from a project I did many years ago, but it was mainly for protected cropping industry, for vegetable production. But on that website, there is a whole lot of fact sheets and guides on how to improve your energy efficiency. And of course, if you do have any questions or you'd like further information, you can contact me through the NGIQ offices or send an email to energiesavers@ngiq.asn.au. So that's pretty much for me. Any questions?
Thanks for that, David. You raised some very good points
I
there.
baffled everyone too much.
Mate, that was good. Thanks for providing some background. Is really good, mate. And you covered quite.
Sorry, I might
quite
have
a few.
turned my.
Yep.
Sorry, I had my speakers turned down.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, mate. I had a few questions pop to mind during your chat, but you sort of covered everything pretty well there. One question I do have, mate, it's about COVID, and it really has put the brakes on the economy at the moment. But would I be correct in saying this is not necessarily the case in the nursery industry at the moment, and production has increased?
Yeah, to a degree. It's one of those sort of things that nobody could predict, that because of COVID and everyone being told to stay at home, everyone kind of reconnected with their green thumbs. And they go down to their local garden centre or Bunnings or whatever, and they buy up their seedlings, which of course increased the demand for plants.
So just where I'm going with that, mate, like the increase in production, it's going to lead to, increased energy consumption and costs for the nursery, isn't it? And I guess it highlights the need to improve efficiency to potentially bring these costs down.
Well, yes, it does. It does. It will increase in demand. Will increase the production cycles, increase the use of electricity. And yes, it certainly will highlight the need to improve efficiencies. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, though, in the sense that a lot of these nurseries that are producing and providing these plants have had increased sales and increased demand. So, like I was saying before, there's that balancing act between producing the plants and meeting the demand and how much it costs. So, yeah, look, it certainly will affect increase in electricity use, and it may highlight to some nurseries that they should look at reducing their energy use and becoming more energy efficient.
Sure. Yeah. So would you say in your findings, the more energy you consume, the greater the energy savings might be if you become more efficient? Like you could save more money by becoming efficient with more, like from using more energy, basically. So the dollar savings stack up even more.
Yeah. It is a sort of a. You're right in the sense that if you become more efficient, you can produce more product for the same level of input. So you're actually getting a higher productivity. So the cost per plant or cost per item or the input cost in electricity per plant is reduced. So as you've probably seen, John, in some of these nurseries, we actually worked out how much energy or how much cost of producing that plant is attributed to energy input. And in some of these cases, some of these plants we calculated would use, and this is just numbers off the top of my head at the moment, maybe 40 cents of energy to produce that plant before any upgrades. But after they've done their upgrade, that 40 cents might come down to around about 23 cents. So yes, there's a number of nurseries that I've spoken to that have said, because they've gone through this process, because they've actually reduced their actual cost of electricity, if you want to get economic on it, their energy or their profit margin has increased, which means they've got more money to put back into improving their systems. So yeah.
So it makes perfect sense, really, doesn't it, to try and improve efficiency on site, really, and that's through heating or any other means possible.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It doesn't really matter, like I said before, it doesn't really matter what industry it is or what production system we're looking at, if that is an inefficient system, it's inefficient. And if you can improve that efficiency, I'm just trying to think of an example that will make it clear might make it easy. But pumping keeps coming back to mind, and irrigation. I know that for many, many years now, there's been a variety of programs that have looked at improving the efficiency of irrigators and irrigation. And in some cases, you may end up having to outlay $40,000 to replace a pump, or to repair an irrigation system. And I'm thinking more along the lines of some of the larger travelling irrigators rather than some of these smaller nursery systems. One that I worked with who had tried to improve their irrigation system through talking to their local supplier and putting in new sprinklers and all that sort of thing. It only made things worse because they were trying to put band-aids on band-aids. But when they actually peeled it all back and looked at the system and looked at what they actually needed to apply to the plant to give them their results, and then worked back through the sprinklers and back to the pump, they realised that they were spending $5,000 to $6,000 on energy for pumping in the old system, and they would actually have to outlay, I can't remember the exact dollar value, but it was somewhere in the vicinity of $30,000 to repair the system. And they were at first it was kind of like, oh, that's far too much money, we can't do that. But when it was put on paper and we went through the numbers and said, yes, you've got to outlay that $30,000, it's going to save you that $5,000 a year. So it's not just an outlay at the beginning, it's the ongoing year-on-year savings that these sort of upgrades make.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, well, we haven't had any more questions pop up, Dave. We might wrap it up there, mate, for now. Thanks for your time. That's really good.
Not a problem.
Cheers, mate.
Like I said, if anybody wants to contact me, they can. And good luck to everyone.
And can you just flick forward to that next slide, mate, if you possibly can, please?
There we go.
Cheers, buddy. So just us QFF wrapping up. We've got plenty of case studies on all our audit findings up on our website at the moment. One that springs to mind, and it highlights David's work a little bit further, is the Tulare HQ Plantations Nursery. They've also got a real-time meter there, which David touched on as well, which was, thanks for that, Dave. We've got another webinar coming up on the 9th of July with the guys from Proven Energy Management on solar and batteries. So if you guys are interested in that, head over to our events page. And if you have any more need any more information about the program or anything in particular about the technology type and what David has discussed, feel free to contact us at the email address listed on the page there. All right, so that's about it from us, and thanks for joining in. See you guys.